everyone. Ollie's already been welcoming everybody, so do you want to at least introduce ourselves and say a little bit something about why we're here and or whatever else you want to say, where you are? Ollie, you want to go give it a go?
Sure, I'll start off. So I'm Oliver. I'm here in Toronto. I've been working with Marco, Natalie, and Jeremy, and Carmen more recently for about 6 months on the Theory of Everybody project. We've read a number of books, and now we're reading GeekLove by Katherine Dunn. It's really unique. It's not like any other book I've ever read, I'd say. It's something that kind of grabs you right away, and at the same time kind of fills you with a little bit of fear about what you're going to experience, because it's a heavy topic. But at the same time, it's held with a kind of a light hand. So that kind of a thing, that kind of a story is something that I think is really good for bringing people together, for giving them a chance to explore something deep about themselves and give them an opportunity to share it in the group. And that's what I'm here to hopefully facilitate and be a part of. So, yeah, that's. I think that's probably gives you a good sense of why I'm here and what I can offer. I have experience in film. That's kind of my career path that I've gone for the last 10 years. So I have a kind of a filmmaker's eye for things. I'm very visual, and reading it to me was almost like watching a movie. And I know there's talk about making a movie out of it, so I'd love to see that happen. So, all right. Who's next? Would you like to go, Carmen?
I'm Carmen. I'm in San Rafael, California. I love this book. I've read it several times over, since it's been out. It's the kind of book that you cannot unsee once your mind has read through a lot of this writing. You just start putting it together and imagining it using the own holodeck of your brain. And it's imprinted there pretty strongly. I love Katherine Dunn's language, and I think this is pretty cool because I've never, here's my caveat, I've never been in a book club before, ever. I didn't really see the point of it, except to get drunk and eat snacks. But I have never, so I hope that we can get through this and oh, hi, there's somebody else there. Hi, Rach. And have a good time. That's what I'm here to do, is have and facilitate a good time. But everybody is also responsible for their own good time. I have to make that Aquarian disclaimer. So.
Very good. Thank you, Carmen. That's great. All right. Who's next? Marco, you're next.
Sure. So my name is Marco Morelli. I'm in Longmont, Colorado. And I'm here because I'm a lit geek. That is, I bite the head off metaphorical chickens. And I have been in book clubs before. I've done a few book clubs. And I have found them to be really just joyous experiences. I like reading. Like when I get into a book, it's like an ecstatic thing for me. I just get really into it. I love exploring characters. I love exploring stories. I love exploring ideas. And I feel that fiction in particular is a really great way. It's a really, let me say, integrative way of exploring ideas and people, and characters, and psychology and philosophy, and a whole bunch of different aspects of us, because it brings you into the lived experience of life. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy just to hang out. And we don't have a whole party per se, and food and beer and all the debauchery that Carmen invoked. But who knows? The night is young. I'm just looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Nice. Thanks, Marco. That's great. Let's see. Would anybody like to go next? Is there somebody?
I'll go next.
Eager to introduce themselves. Hello.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great, Jim.
Okay, good. I took off my headset, and so Rachel could hear my wife. I've never been in a book club before. I've thought about joining book clubs, but there was never a book club that really seemed that interesting to me, and I didn't want to feel like I had to be subject to the rules or the choices that different groups of people made. I felt like it's a fairly big commitment, so I've always wanted to kind of just read what I wanted to read, when I wanted to read it, how I wanted to read it, etc. But this one seemed like it might be a little different. Carmen was the person that first told me about it, and I felt like something that Carmen was interested in and was involved with sounded like it might be very interesting for me, although I'm a little more trepidatious, if I can use that word, than Carmen. I'm excited about this. I don't think I would have ever picked up a book like this to read before. I'm about 100 pages into it, and I find the book itself amazing. It's just, I mean, it's inconceivable to me that this was a storyline for somebody to write a novel about. I never would have even thought about the subject, honestly. I'm not sure if I am a norm or a geek. I think I'm maybe a closet geek in a way, and posing as a norm in society. But I'm fascinated by it, and I already feel like I'm a member of the family, which surprised me, because at first getting into it was actually a little bit weird. I have another friend that I mentioned it to. I don't think he's here today. He may not even be reading the book, because he said he just thought it just wasn't the subject matter that would interest him. And I said, you get into it a little more, man. I think maybe you'll warm up to this. And I've completely warmed up to it. In fact, it's amazing how intimate this has been for me. It's not hyperbole to say that I just feel like I'm part of this family right now in this book. And I'm amazed by it. And I'm amazed that it all seems so real to me. So it's not the least bit creepy. It seemed a little creepy at first. And so I'm in the process right now, and I'm just kind of amazed by the fact that I've been so captivated by not just the book, but by the characters in this book. Each one of them has become so special to me, and I feel just that I'm just becoming connected to this whole experience. So yeah, it's pretty magical and pretty amazing. So far so good.
Yeah, exactly. It does seem to induce a kind of intimacy that's almost shocking. I can agree with that. I can definitely understand what you're talking about when you say that. It's also, I should admit, this is my first book club as well, and it's my first time reading the book as well, and I've actually just finished it. And I had this weird effect of being hooked on it almost. I couldn't stop reading it, and then when I got away from it, I didn't want to go back to it. So it has this kind of opening and addictive quality to it that's really unique, and that's really kind of fascinating.
Excuse me, just only one more thing. Mm-hmm. I'm doing something that I highly recommend. I'm reading it, and I'm also listening to it kind of redundantly. Mm-hmm. So I listen on audio as I take a walk usually each afternoon. And the reader happens to be on Audible. It's not audio, it's audible.com. The reader is just fantastic. And that experience of hearing it read has really added tremendous dimensionality to me. And also reading it and then listening to it, it's in effect, I'm getting a a double reading. So after I finish a chapter, I go out and listen to the same chapter. And so that's been a very powerful way to experience this book.
You know, I've done exactly the same thing. I went to Audible and I picked it up and I did exactly the same thing. Although I didn't do a lot of overlap, I did a fair amount of sharing, but I would recommend that to other people as well. The actress who does the performance is fantastic. She's amazing the way she handles the different voices. And as the novel progresses, she gets just better and better. I would definitely second exactly what he's saying, what Jim's saying there. And definitely, if you get a hold of the Audible version, the first month is free. If you're not already on Audible, it's completely free. You just have to have a valid credit card. Definitely take the time to at least listen to her performance because it's fantastic.
All right, who's next?
All right. Belzy, I'm calling on you, buddy.
I go. Let's see. I'm definitely not anything that anybody would call a lit geek. I mean, if I think back to the amount of fiction that I've read over the last 30 years, it would actually be very easy for me to enumerate, which is, will invoke in many of you a sense of, soul deficiency and sadness. And to me, it's, all right, it's not where I put my creative energies. I'm very involved in other art forms, music and visual art, but for various reasons, I don't actually read a whole lot of fiction. And when Carmen mentioned to me that she was going to be co-leading this book club around GeekLove, I had immediate yes to it. And the reason is because I had read the book pretty much when it came out. So it's close to 30 years ago. And it's as you know, it's one of those books that really, it can't help but make a very strong impression. And for me, also, that time in my life was like, it was perfect, for that time in my life when I was throwing myself up against the wall to try to break down the walls of my psyche. And this book was kind of just like one piece of a larger puzzle of that. And the past few years has been an interesting experiment in, I don't know, I guess call it octaving, like revisiting things like that. Like old experiences, not for nostalgic purposes, but more like in a way to reference a new self experiencing something that's 20, 30 years old and through the eyes of the younger me and through the eyes of the older me, and like really experiencing what that octave feels like at the psychic level. So in that sense, I'm really just enjoying the opportunity to reread this quite profound book, which had also a profound experience on me in my own personal development. So that's a little bit of the historical and inner context for it. And what else? I'm actually very intrigued by the themes that I could have, easily remembered certain elements of the story and elements of the characters, but there are themes in it that I'm starting to percolate with and be interested to unpack in a way that I wouldn't have been able to 30 years ago. Themes of power and manipulation, the way the characters are all kind of working, in a way that's you don't notice it until you stop, because as we were saying, the book is written in such a sort of an easy way. It's just sort of everything is normal. It's just natural. This is just the way we are. And it's just very matter of fact in the way the story is told. But a lot of the shit that goes on is like, whoa, even the simple stuff is quite manipulative and interesting power games.
Yeah.
So anyway, just as an example of like some themes that you kind of have to cut underneath the surface of being distracted by how wild and crazy and amazing the story and the writing is. So I think there's a lot to tease out in what's really going on under the surface there.
That's beautiful. I love that metaphor of the octaving. That's really cool. I like that. Definitely going to refer back to that one again.
Us folks who have enough age behind us to actually octave.
Yeah, we could do that now. Okay, who's next? Jeremy and Natalie? One of you guys want to jump in here? Introduce yourselves. I think we all already know who you are, but let's do it anyway.
Okay, don't mind the lawnmower. Our landlord is mowing. Yeah, so some of you know my name is Jeremy, and I've been helping out with this whole meta project for a couple months now, since last fall or so.
More than a couple months.
Yeah.
That's a couple.
Yeah, it's like, half a year, I guess. Yeah, just kind of curious about the book in a literary sense. As a writer myself, I certainly am experiencing a different way of writing, so it's kind of stretching my kind of creative skills myself to to write and to use the English language in this way, and to kind of paint this kind of strange landscape this way. I can't exactly explain it, but just to sort of imagine the world the way Katherine Dunn does, and the characters. It's been a fun experience. I'm only 2 chapters in, but I'm enjoying it so far. In that sense, it's kind of teaching me. So yeah, that's kind of just where I am. I don't have too much to contribute yet, but yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, I'm not very far in either. I'm probably about 2.5 chapters in. And I am really, by the way, I'm Natalie. I'm also working on the litgeeks project. I hosted the last reading, which was of The Saddlebag. Very different book, very, very different book. And it's interesting because for those of you, this is like your first litgeeks read, we do really different books every time. In fact, that was sort of our aim, was to do really different books, but also try and find themes that are common within the books and sort of discuss that as well. So it's interesting. I'm really enjoying the word choices she uses, and she uses words that I'm pretty sure, like the, dreamlets and stuff. She's just creating like these words that work really well for what she's like. You understand what she's saying, even though she's using words you may have never read before, which I think is the mark of a really good writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Lewis Carroll and all of those people had that talent. And so far, yeah, I'm just enjoying it. I haven't read it far enough to really make any kind of great commentary on it. It does remind me already. I'm a big fan of American Horror Story, and if any of you have watched that show, there is a season on it called Freak Show. And I'm pretty sure they just read the book and were like, let's just do a season that's like completely inspired by this book and like just take everything from it, but not credit her at all.
Oh, wow.
It's like, you should watch it, because like some of the characters in this book are just like completely ripped off in that season. I was actually a little bit shocked to see all of the themes that they're taking from this book, just like shamelessly almost. But anyways, so yeah, so it seems like it's going to be an interesting read. Definitely not something I would pick up on my own. So it's going to be an interesting literary expansion for me. So yeah.
It's interesting you say that, Natalie. I've noticed too, as I've been reading it, that this, and I was told this ahead of time, this book has been a huge influence on a lot of artists over the last, since its inception, since it was created. And you can see that. Like, this is a completely new book to me, but I just know there's so much familiarity with it that goes beyond just it being just the way that she wrote things and got you to be intimate with the characters. There's definitely been, and I've started to do that now. I've started to look out and try and find places where people have had a direct influence. So that's a great example. I'm definitely going to want to check that out. Thank you for mentioning it.
And they're self-contained seasons, so you don't need to watch the other seasons of American Horror Story. You can just watch that one. You'll see immediately what I mean. First episode.
Cool. That sounds great. All right. So I think that's everybody.
Chris.
Right?
No, we got Chris.
Oh, Chris still. Sorry.
And
Rachel.
Yes.
I'll just say that I read this book in 1990, so that's 26 years ago. I was friends with a group of grad students and a very different kind of artists in, of all places, West Texas and Arizona, who were kind of on the cutting edge at that time, at least of art and literature. And one of them had given me this book, and I had since given it, at least early on, to a number of other people because I thought it was so different and interesting and odd and wonderful, and it stayed with me for a really long time, although I couldn't recall all the parts now, having not read it for probably the last time I read it was 15 years ago, but I've read it a few times. It's just a valuable book, great to pass on. Quite a surprise to anyone you give who's a reader. I don't think they would be expecting anything like this. I'm just curious to see what you guys recommend next.
Yeah, I'm curious as well. we kind of play it by ear each time. But since you're part of Lit Geeks now and you have some kind of exposure to it, feel free to make suggestions. We're always looking for new material. We're always looking for new direction. And definitely anybody who has an interest in being here, we want to know what their opinions are and what their interests are. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right, Chris.
All right. Unlike Jeff and Jim's lovely wife, I didn't read this book when it came out or close to the time when it came out. And unlike the rest of you, I am in my pre-first reading. So I haven't much to say.
Okay.
That's all right.
Oh, except and this is this take it as idle flattery, if you will, but an experience with this small group prior to this one, and Jim's greater knowledge of some of the players here. Both of those conditions, my own and Jim's, recommend the participants highly enough so that I can have the chutzpah to join a book club and sit in on a discussion for a book that I have not read.
So Chris, you're okay with spoilers though, because we're gonna be spoiling the whole thing, right?
Yeah, and there are spoilers in there.
Oh well.
We're going to be spoiling it right now. We'll tell
There are big things to spoil, so we don't want to.
I have a long and sordid history in geekdom, so I thought that I would be shocked. Surprised? No doubt. Shocked? Unlikely.
Here's a question for everybody that I want to throw out there. Has anybody ever actually seen a geek perform?
Yes.
Or been to a freak show?
Yes.
Both of you guys? Wow. Well,
do tell a little bit about it. Because I was curious if she had just completely invented the concept or if it was actually something that has been done.
No, it's a real thing. It's why what's his name? Is it Ozzy? No, not Ozzy Osbourne. Is it Alice Cooper or Ozzy Osbourne who was the one who did it?
Ozzy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
well, I have heard of Ozzy Osbourne doing this. And
he didn't make it up.
I didn't know the veracity of those, those reports. But I mean, historically, in carnivals, just like the kind that are described here, did geeks perform by actually biting off the heads of chicken? Is that historically real?
Yes.
Well, here's one story I heard: is it would be used almost like an addictive thing. They would find somebody who was hooked on some kind of drug, and at the low part of their life, and get them to do this performance and pay them in their drug of choice. And they would teach them to cut the chicken with a razor blade ahead of time. And so it was just like something they could get into. It's like, it's not a big deal. You could do that. But then they would take the razor blade away at some point when the person was totally hooked into the supply of getting the drug. So they would have to bite the head off the chicken.
I don't know if you're bullshitting me or not.
I know. I don't. This is a story that I heard. That's. I think that makes sense. Actually, I think that's
actually. I lied. I didn't actually see literally a geek show. I saw a freak show, and this was when I was very young. I'm in my 70s now, so I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and I did go to a carnival. In fact, I do think it was at the original Ocean Park here in LA, and so they had freaks, which didn't bite the heads off of chickens. Not that I can recall. So and there may have been a geek in the mix, and I just might have repressed it because it's a very weird phenomenon to me. But there were freaks, and you paid to get in, and you'd go through the thing in like the little jars in one of the early chapters. They had these very weird things in these big jars, and there were midgets and fat ladies and hunchbacks and Siamese twins, and so there was a variety of I guess what would be called freaks, but I don't recall anybody biting the head off a chicken, and it all seemed quite normal to me as a little boy. Just it was kind of like, wow, woo, this is interesting, and I didn't think about any of the child welfare issues or any of those political issues at the time. It was just kind of part of what I was doing. I was at a carnival, and I was looking at the freaks.
Right. Well, it's a short extension to assume if they're doing that, showing the kids like this, and there's no ethical, bounds around it. Why not have, same thing with animals. Why couldn't they just kill animals in public? Because that would be the thing. You can never do it now, right? Because of human rights. But maybe it's still going on somewhere else in the world. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on there. Bullfights are the closest that I've been to. That would be like this, where they killed animals. Yeah.
Yeah, in Bloomington, where I went to college, there's a big petition being passed around. The more liberal, there's Bloomington is a college town, and then Indiana surrounds it. And there is, for the Monroe County, they're trying to do sounds very mundane, but it's actually this kind of horrific thing where the pigs being thrown around, and it's very brutal. And so now all of the very progressive liberal types inside of Bloomington are signing this petition to get the Monroe County pig wrestling stopped, but all of the rural still love that kind of animal domination, doing this thing. It's still part of the culture there. It's kind of interesting how there's still kind of a tension in some parts of the country between what you can and can't do with animals, which you're allowed to do. But I do know that I have heard of geeking before, and it was actually from American Horror Story. That's where I first learned about it. There's actually a geek on American Horror Story. It's this little guy. He's really weird, and that's his whole thing. It's biting the heads off of chicken. They call him the geek. I didn't know that was a particular term at the time. So again, lots of references in that series to this book, I think. But I think that I don't think it was necessarily. I don't know if it's necessarily has to be associated with a freak show, or if it was one of those things that was near the freak show, where it's they also had the strip teases and stuff in other tents, and it was all just kind of in one area of tantalizing things. But it kind of makes you think. We were listening to it a hardcore history podcast, and the podcast host was talking about what drives people to want to watch other human beings being tortured. It's why in the Middle Ages would the entire village come out for a good time? They would have come out and watch people being torn apart. And I think it's that same drive. There's something in human beings that likes to watch carnage, and even other human beings. But I don't really know what it is. I think that's a psychological thing. But I think that's kind of the theme in the book. There's something about people, even in the first chapter where she's they grab her and force her to go on stage during the striptease and strip her and have no compassion for her at all. What's happening? Right. There's some sort of urge inside of people to do or enjoy watching the awful, and I think that's even in 24-hour movies, different iterations of it. So.
That's right, and what's beautiful is how she feels in that moment, the sense of beauty and ownership of self that she has in that moment is so at odds with what you just talked about and the way you described, that whole polarity, the way it plays out through the novel is just fantastic. that's what really hooks you in, is that first scene when she exposes herself and she owns it. There's something about the ownership of the dark parts of ourselves that are there, and the like how beautiful she is in that moment.
And it's interesting. I had a slightly different experience of that scene, especially in the context of the way that like one of the elements of the book is playing out, as you know, especially as we're talking about like torture and violence and things. I think from the perspective of the Banusky family, they revel in the ability to create that experience for other people. There's a certain power in being able to essentially arouse that sense of hierarchy. Like they are the ones who are creating this experience for you, and they can make you feel fill in the blank, whether it's revulsion or attraction or whatever. There's an intense response that you get, and they're in control of that.
Right.
And the dancing scene in a way was what's Hopalong. That's our other nickname. In a sense, it was her turning the tables. You know, they threw her on the stage, but she actually grabbed the reins of power.
Right.
In the way she turned it around, saying, actually, I can actually make you feel more uncomfortable than you think you're making me feel, by me just sort of like letting it hang out and being as weird and as whatever it is, disgusting, or however she enabled other people to respond to her. She basically took control, which I thought was, in a sense, quite a strong metaphor for a lot of the different pieces that are happening in the way these circus freak show people are actually controlling other people or exercising that level of power.
That's beautiful. Yeah, well put.
It's interesting because there's another, I think, aspect to what's going on with Oli, where she's in a way losing control too at the same time. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean that there's this way that she's stalking her daughter, Miranda, right? She's following her to her place of work, around town. Like, she wants to keep an eye on her. She wants to know what she's up to. Like, she wants to know her, right? Because they've been severed for reasons that we could discuss. And she gets a little bit too close. Yeah. And it's like she gets pulled into this scenario where she gets exposed on stage, clothes torn off, naked. And then, she owns it. But then she ends up basically like attracting Miranda to her, because Miranda wants to draw her. Miranda is an artist or medical illustrator, and is, although she doesn't know her origins, she doesn't know that was born from this family and that she's kind of the result of these genetic experiments. She has this curiosity about it that's expressing itself in her artistic impulse. And Oli, though, gets herself re-entangled, even though she wanted to, at one level, want to keep herself away. So 2 times, and then each time that she gets kind of trapped, she is forced to get naked. And to, once on stage in the striptease, and then once when Miranda is drawing her. What's so cool about the book, and what I'm still not learning how to relate to, is that she and I'm only these 5 chapters in as well, so I don't know the full trajectory of the book. I'm in the middle of it. But she turns it around and she owns it, and yet at the same time I can't feel fully comfortable with that, because she's also the product of this experiment. She was brought into the world for instrumental means, right? What happened to her daughter Miranda is that she just wasn't weird enough. All she had was a little tail. It wasn't good enough. So they kicked her out of the family, right? They sent her, they claimed that she was an orphan. They sent her to a boarding school to live and learn with nuns. And then they took care of her. They did have an apartment for her and a trust fund. But otherwise she was, dispossessed of her family. And so, that could have easily happened to Oli. One of her complexes is that she's not she's not as weird, you know, she's not like as much of a draw as her sisters on the one hand, or her brother Artie on the other. She's like just barely good enough, right? And she's gotten good enough because I guess she has a good voice. She's, you know, there's that scene where her dad is training her, you know, and he's really like demanding of her that she put herself into the voice, that she do the job, she perform the function of attracting people to the show, getting them in the mood, doing that like kind of magic, and, you know, making the carnival successful. So it's complicated. I don't think, like, yeah, I mean, that's one of the ways that the book is enjoyable to me, is that I really have to see multiple sides of these characters' lives, and then reflect back on, okay, what does that mean, you know, for me? And how, you know, I'm not physically, you know, deformed or anything, but like, in what ways do I feel weird, or what ways am I weird, or in what ways am I normal? And like, you know, how did those categories really play out in my life?
Yeah, exactly. It has this aspect, or this way of like forcing you, because she was exposed in that way, because she's so, I don't know, we're forced to do that with her. She carries us through the story. She's the narrator. So we go through that same process ourselves. We're forced to have to do that. We're forced to have to look at the parts of ourselves and how we relate to other people. I mean, every character is going to do that in a book in one way or another. But this character has such a compelling way of doing that you can't resist it. It's almost irresistible. The journey that we're going to go on, even though it's going to be weird, we want to go there.
It's funny because you talked about earlier how the book has this kind of push-pull for you.
Yeah.
And that's almost how Oli is too. Like, she has a push-pull with her own disowned, you know, other parts, or her own family, her own.
Yeah.
And then ultimately she gets pulled in. That's like the story, like, of these first 5 chapters. For me, like, that's like what happens. And then we get into it. And like, I don't know where that's going to go, but
yeah. It's a great ride. What I'm saying is the ride that we're going to go on is so like up and down and all over the place that even though you feel like weird about this character, it's good that you're feeling weird. You know, you want to embrace the weirdness that's being brought up, because it's going to be quite a journey that you're going to go on. I don't want to foreshadow.
You're like our carnival barker. You're like, come one, come all.
Yeah, I'm taking on that. See, I'm taking on her role. That's what this book does, and it infects you in a certain way. It forces you to be the character.
I'd really like to back up a little bit in relation to the book, because I'm wondering if anybody had the same reaction to. And I don't know how many of you, I know you do, Marco, and you do, Carmen, have children. But you know, one of the most, I guess, frightening moments in. I've been extremely close to childbirth, literally delivering a few of my own children, and just participating in a lot of actual live births of children and animals, but mostly children. But the fact that Lil, not only knowingly but happily volunteered her body to have these deformed children, and this is, I assume it's, I don't remember the date of thalidomide, but this must be pre-thalidomide, I would think. But one of the great fears of women and men and fathers and mothers, etc., and all of us, is to have a deformed child. You know, one of the first things, you know, does he or she have all her fingers and toes and all of that? And here, I mean, this is like so twisted in that sense. It goes against this whole thing to desire a deformed child and want to get rid of drop off at the gas station or drop off at the laundromat, the normal child. That was one of the first things that struck me, was what an amazing turnaround this is. I don't recall any horror films or anything that had such a complete paradoxical turnaround on something that goes so deep into human consciousness, that all of us, are happy when we're not deformed, or when we don't have a deformed offspring. And here, this is exalted. I mean, that's essentially the first thing that just really hit me in this book. The geek thing, yeah, that was weird, but this was really different. And that's what made this such an original tale to me. It was profound.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended.
Well,
that's true.
I like you sort of bring up one of the simple and, in a sense, obvious themes of the book, which is, in a sense, this is an adult retelling of The Ugly Duckling. In other words, you think you're off center, but actually you're perfectly normal, right? And in fact, there's, within the context of this family, weirder is normaler, in the sort of upside down telling that you're talking about. But if you sort of get into that frame where the idea of weirdness actually isn't, because we have this visceral response to weirdness, which you brought up the sort of the biological version of it, but then there's all the different psychic levels of, wanting to fit in, right, and be normal. We all have different versions of that particular thing going on, right? But this turns that entirely on its head and says, actually, it's all it's more than welcome. This is a different sort of cohesion. We're bonding in something very different than that. And if you take that as the starting point and then roll it back to her motive, right? If you take, Oli's impulse and the way that the kids feel that this is normal and they perfectly well belong, the parents, in a way, wanting to create a family of belonging within that context makes a different sort of sense.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Way to recontextualize it. Yeah. What?
I do not detect any shame in the Benuskis so far. From Papa, they call him Aliosis, to Lil, to Oli. Like, they are, so far, the way that they're portrayed is completely at ease with themselves, and celebratory of themselves, like inclusive. They feel included because they're weird. So that is, there's something like liberating about that. I think also, one thing that occurred to me this morning when I was kind of reading the last chapter is like, wait a minute, there's like an economics under this too. And like, on the one hand, they're artists, right? And the carnival is their work of art, and their bodies is their work of art. But on the other hand, they also have to survive. I wrote a little bit about this in the forum, and the precipitating like circumstances for even undertaking these experiments in genetic manipulation was that the carnival was it was going under, it was going bankrupt, right? It got like passed on, and like he needed something, like he needed some innovation to get his business afloat. And that's where he got into, that's where the brilliant idea struck him, that he would breed his own freak children. But then, so it really like stems from like this need to make a profit. And that's to me one of the disturbing things about it. And at the same time, insofar as the freakishness of the kids is like a metaphor for creativity and weirdness and difference, and not just the biological level, it's also this tie between art and art making and this economic imperative. that, kind of like drives us or necessitates us to be weird, because like that's what artists are supposed to be. Like that's what makes them interesting. But that could also be a trap, right? Because you're doing it, you're potentially doing it for very selfish reasons, and you're potentially not, like, you're just an attraction, and you make people uncomfortable, but are you actually serving something?
Right. How does art serve other people besides the artist? How does the freakishness serve the other people? How can is that possible, or is it all just like, can it serve? Is it not a good thing? Is it only going to take people away?
I don't know. I mean, like, reading this book, like, part of me resisted reading it because, like, there's so much going on in the world right now. Like, do I have time for a freak show, when this, fascist demagogue is about to, like, take power in this country? And, like, we don't have to get into that.
Yeah.
But there's that aspect to it. Like, so what is the real, like, value of weirdness, freakishness, geekiness? Like, it must, I think it has some value. I mean, I felt actually better about the state of the world, a little bit, after getting through the reading.
Yeah.
And I
Did
just
it make you feel more normal?
a little, yeah. I mean, definitely.
Well, there's value in that then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about what you were saying about the economics piece of it, just rolling back to one of the other things you were talking about, because in a way you were also describing the way farmers would have children in order to work the land. It's like, just, we need more bodies. Just children as commodities, as purely practical functions. Yeah, I'll love you, but that's secondary.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if you couldn't, then, I mean, you were a burden on the family, or you're a burden on the tribe, or I mean, unless there's the surplus of resources, to sustain weirdness for its own sake, then it kind of gets, historically, cut out, And then you could look at the freak shows as a survival strategy. It's
Right.
just a way of, finding a niche where you can survive in a world which otherwise doesn't quite need your, it doesn't quite need you, or which you can't quite serve.
Yeah. Well, with a farm, though, it's clear as to how that can sustain over generations and generations. Can the same thing work out with the freaks? Can they do this for many generations? Does it have the same? What can we learn from the similarities and the differences between those worlds? How does a family sustain itself? That's, for me, actually, is a personal question that I've always struggled with in my life. Why are generations becoming so detached from one another? Like, why did I not know my grandparents? Why did I not live with them in my own personal life? And there's so many people I know that have grown up where generations have been scattered. It doesn't happen on farm life as much, but generations are starting to separate.
Or if there's a family business, right?
Or family. Exactly. So what does that mean for us? This book somehow is addressing that in some way. The generational gaps and finding ways to bridge them.
Can you guys hear us?
You're quite anemic. Your sound is quite anemic.
How about now?
That's better. When you aim it at the mic.
Okay. You wanted to go, right?
I'd like to introduce an idea that you stimulated in me, Marco, that Papa is really, you can make a real case. Papa's pretty evil. He's not really a protagonist in any way. I mean, his motivation, I don't see. I mean, it's very materialistic. He and Artie, I guess, got a little more of his genes at least so far. I don't know how this turns either, because I'm only about probably maybe a little over a third into the book. But it seems that this is a really complex. This is really complex. I mean, if you start dissecting these characters, there are some archetypal characteristics that when you started talking about economics, and I don't know whether I don't know enough about the author to know whether she's doing some sort of a critique on capitalism or on this was written in the late 80s, and I don't know how politics of the late 80s affected her. I do know this. I read an article, and I highly recommend it, in Vogue magazine that she wrote. It was the only thing I could find. It was an essay on what she called, I think it was The Bad Girl. But I thought it was a brilliantly written piece, and I got a glimpse of her politics there. But it still didn't reveal enough to me, and I don't know enough about her to talk about what her point of view really is or was. And she seemed like she's certainly quite liberal. I mean, we'd have to agree with that. But this character, he still seems highly regarded. Although I guess there's a conflict that I see as beginning between him and his son Artie. But I mean, he's cold. He was willing to drop off Chick until he found out that Chick had this power, and he thought, well, wow, I could really use this kid. So that's interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this for me and how this develops. This is why I am kind of hooked on this, because there's a lot that's yet to be revealed, as I haven't finished this book.
Jeremy, Natalie, were you going to hop in?
Oh, I was just going to mention something about the whole, there was one comment, very briefly, the author wrote into the book about how the mother feels like it's like giving, like, the mother's motivation was interesting in that I think the word was inherited security, where she felt like if her kids were freaks, then they would always have a living just by being themselves, which is like the same way as, like, I guess people that have like trust funds and stuff, they're like born into a sense of security, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it. I was trying to feel some sort of sympathy for the parents and like how they could still be good parents, even if they like intentionally deformed their children. And yeah, I don't know. But I thought that was an interesting concept to play around with, that the idea that they were doing their kids a favor by doing these things, they were creating their kids intentionally to be these freaks, which it's interesting because freaks usually were forced into freak shows because when you were born with disabilities or deformities back in the day, there wasn't really any other way for your family to support you unless they were wealthy enough to feed you on their own. But if you were just like a farmer's kid and you were like had some weird deformity where you couldn't work the farm, they almost had to give you to somebody, or they leave, or they would abandon you when you were a baby. So it's like a reverse almost. But like there was a necessity for going into a freak show. Like people didn't necessarily choose it. It was something that they had to do. Whereas these people are intentionally creating freaks, but at the same time, they're still not giving their children a choice. They're like creating people without the ability to choose what they want to do with their lives. Yeah, they're giving them like a sense where they'll always have a means of making income, but it's interesting that to really kind of think of that idea, because freak shows were like this place of security for people with deformities and that sort of thing, to all be together and like band together. But in this sense, it's almost like twisted a little bit, where this guy is like intentionally creating freaks to make money off of, even if they're his own kids. It's just, it feels really, it's very parasitical, which is always kind of how freak shows are, but it's also, there's an ownership there, which I guess is still within the family itself. But I don't know. It's like taking the freak show, which is like kind of people just kind of wind up there and putting an intentionality behind it, which is something I guess we were already seeing a little bit with the performative aspects of the family. But Jeremy, do you have anything to say?
Well, I mean, if we take it to the psychological level, like not the literal like breeding deformities, because that's grotesque and that's wrong. I think. I mean, I'm willing to say that. I mean, although who knows what will become possible with real genetic engineering and the ability to get a home, a kit and do your own, create your own creatures, at home. I actually think you can do that a little bit, at least microbially.
Cockroaches.
Yeah. But like one of the, I think, economic realities that like we are facing generationally now is we actually have the capacity to feed everybody, and to get a lot of work done through technology, modern agriculture, all this stuff. I mean, technically, we don't need all 8 billion people working to produce the resources that would sustain all those people to sustain full populations. And because of these economic, inequalities and power dynamics and so forth, that's not the case. We're creating a lot of surplus for very few people to enjoy. But if we got our act together and sort of reorganize like how we do business on the planet, we could sustain a nice population with very few people actually working, or with the work being done spread out and being minimal. So, I mean, that's called technological unemployment, right? So what then becomes the value in a scenario like that? Like, what makes you, like, how can you participate in the economy if you're not actually needed to feed, anybody or to extract energy, whatever needs to be done? And I think like one of the things is like, okay, well, people start exploring their identities and exploring different possibilities. And, we now online, we take on different avatars, and it's like, that's part of just, I guess, where the octave, goes in terms of the survival. And it's no longer a material survival that's necessarily at stake. It's maybe a social survival. It's individual survival, psychological. I mean, there's other. It starts to move into that realm, and I definitely see this like in the world of art and in the world of literature and like or entertainment in general. Like it's all about getting attention, and you get attention by being weird, by being different, right? And that's sort of the business, right? So, it is like I think of my daughters, and of course I wouldn't have wanted them to be born deformed, but I do want them to be different. I do want them to be weird. I feel like that will actually help them. And so as a practical matter, we're homeschooling. They're not going to the factory school system. They're not going to be just kind of shuffled through the grades and the bureaucracy and the indoctrination of our society. I mean, so they are going to be different. And I feel like that's actually going to be a strength. When they grow up, the more different experiences they have, like the more that they're abnormal, but still functional, obviously, and still grounded and so forth. The better for them. And I wonder if that's something that Katherine was onto, which now is even more normal. Geekdom has become more acceptable. It's almost normal now.
Yeah.
And it's like a cultural commodity even to be geeky, to be weird.
Yeah. Well, in a sense, it's kind of cultivating adaptability, isn't it? In them. What better gift could you give to your child? The capacity to move through any kind of social group and to be a part of any social group. and to enter it and to leave it and to connect them in some sense. Moving on to a psychological or a social level, that's what this book is about in some ways. How do you teach adaptability to your children? And part of that is like confronting your own relationship to your child, which at some point is going to be like, there's some things about what this kid's doing that I don't like. I don't like the way that they're going. So how do I correct that? Or how do I turn that into something that allows them to be more adaptable in the world? Because being adaptability is pretty fundamental human. As a creature, as an animal on this planet, it's a very powerful and useful and fundamental part of who we are. And
it has to do with being comfortable with difference, because adaptable means that you can adjust your behavior, your language, your being to different situations, to different people, to different perspectives, right? So, I mean, the more that you're exposed to all of those, and the more you can kind of, let those be part of your, just your worldview or your understanding of the world, the more adaptable. I think you put it really well.
You actually invite those experiences to happen.
Yeah. I'm realizing there is a political dimension to this. Like, I don't want to talk about Democrats and Republicans or anything like that, but that is one of the pivot points here, is that there's kind of one movement, or this is speaking very simplistically, but where that's really seen the virtue of difference, like the value of difference is more embraced. And there's the other that's really reacting against that. And that's one of the axes on which this whole political system situation seems to be like hinging.
Right. Yeah.
One of, because the economic is also another.
I think the one thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking is not just adaptability, but sort of the from the psychological perspective, the normal human creativity. Like if you think of humanity on a spectrum, in a sense, our natural condition as people is very free and very, adaptive is one part of creativity, but it's actually in a sense, weird is normal to, within a certain usage of that word weird, like we're meant to actually be free individuals, in sort of healthy psychological sense. Take it one direction, you end up in factory school systems and you end up totally suppressed, totally cookie cutter, ticky-tacky human being. Taken the other way, you become essentially a psychological deformity, somebody who's creative, but is really just sort of contrarian, which is not free either. It's also, it's a different type of bondage, to the other type of suppression. And I think there's a metaphor in here in terms of the physical deformity, because, as you were talking, Marco, I was just hearing the Pink Floyd lyric out, Mama's going to put all of her fears into you. The standard psychology that we all actually understand at this point, that in fact what they were doing was a physical manifestation of that.
Wow.
And there's thinking about it psychologically about where natural creativity and natural difference and natural sort of adaptability live versus the grotesque versions of that, the sort of consciously crafted contrarian versions, which aren't free and aren't truly creative, but are just, in a sense, truly deformities, and how that all plays out on a human psychic level.
Yeah. Well put.
I usually hate things that have anything to do with the triumph of the human spirit. I find it cheesy. So I don't watch movies like that at all. But, all of this conversation is making me actually think of that. I'm trying not to think of Papa Benusky as a hero, but we can tune our empathy for him, and maybe in some weird megalomaniacal way, he was like, you know what? I'm going to create these fucking crazy ass babies, and it will be a triumph of the human spirit if they survive, if somehow they live. And like that's so Triumph of the Human Spirit in a really weird way. So I'm like, okay, you know, I can get into that. I can see that it's just like it's stacking the odds against them in a way, and like daring them to survive and live gives them a fearlessness. At least Artie has it. Artie isn't scared of anything, and you know, his lack of empathy, I think, is just because it's like, what do I have to be empathetic about? You know, you guys empathize with me. I'm in the shittiest situation ever, but I'm going to overcome it. And like, I can see why eventually he goes all Tony Robbins, because if he can somehow, you know, find confidence in himself and be like this motivational, you know, guru in himself because of like, hey, you know, what's your excuse? He would be great. Like if we could take that and like port that into, you know, these modern times with all of the gurus and stuff like that, I'm sure we could build a cult around him for real. Because of that adaptability, because of that fearlessness, because of that, you know, I'm alive and I've got fans and this is how I look, and look at all of my alleged, you know, disabilities, you normative people. And could you do this if you were me?
Right.
So, yeah. I wonder, it's Triumph of the Human Spirit to me in that really kind of perverse way. One thing that I don't know how long we're going today. Are we going to 6:15 or like whatever, 15 after or 30 after?
We're playing it by ear. It's
okay. Well,
we schedule it for an hour, 30 minutes. That's typically
okay.
how we've done it. But we could go less, more, whatever, you know.
Okay.
Nobody's watching yet.
All right. Well, one of the things that I wanted to get in there, because I was perplexed by this before, was Miss Lick and what her deal is. And because, you know, I understand everyone's got weird fetishes, but this is really, you know, like she doesn't want to touch, she doesn't want to whatever, she just wants to witness the transformation of of freak to normal or something like that. And it's so twisted to me. I still am perplexed by it, and I just wanted to bring it to the table to be discussed, because it's what a weird I mean, I've known a lot of weird fetishes, but that one I still don't understand completely. So.
It's almost like she opened up Katherine opened up Pandora's box, and like, now I got to deal with every kind of possible freak that could be. And so she gets inventive in her idea of what freakishness is. And so you get a character like Miss Lick. She has to she must be balancing something out.
Well, she's balancing the parents. You know, she's the one that's cleaning up in a weird, perverted sense. She's cleaning up the messes that the Beneskis made.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's this wonderful balance that Katherine somehow hit upon. But you can tell the whole novel kind of it almost was probably a surprise to her. I've had this feeling too, and I don't know, you know, the creative people out there, when you're creating something, at some point, there's an actual point, you notice, the work, whatever it is, starts to speak on its own. It starts to talk to you. And you kind of the more you can get out of the way, the fuller the creation becomes, the fuller the artifact fills itself out. And that's the sense that you get with Miss Lick. She's a character that provides that. There are other characters that come in that do that as well too. They find there's a wonderful balance that happens, where you're questioning the motive of why this character is doing that. Another character steps in and gives you an answer.
Listen, whenever I think about anybody with fetishes, I try to like port myself into that consciousness and to empathize and wonder, okay, so what about this makes you like it? What about this, obsesses you or creates the fixation? And when I read about her, because we never get to hear from her perspective, only just all these observations of her, and Miranda's descriptions, I guess, it's like she seeks out the freakishness, but she wants to normalize it all. She wants to eradicate it, whatever, for what purpose? Like a moral purpose?
She's kind of freakish on her own, though. I mean, the little I know about her, she's the heiress to the Lickety Splits company. A food heiress. Her husband's name is Thomas R. Lick. I mean, the last name is Lick. And when he dies, she imagines that the headline of the newspaper on the obituary page would read, "Lick splits."
Yeah.
I laughed out loud. That was a LOL moment. Then I have to just read this because the old man is spread out on the worm buffet. And one thing about this book, I mean, it's funny. And the other thing is, like, the language is super vivid. Like, I mean, like these like micro perceptions, like just really surprising. Like even just 2 or 3 words, I've underlined probably 100 of them so far.
Yeah, it's rife with those little moments, and it is hilarious too. There are times, especially listening to the audiobook, the performance, I fell to the ground laughing like several times.
Regarding Miss Lick, I thought about her too, Carmen and Marco. I thought about her as the kind of archetypal far right-wing conservative that enjoys proving that anybody will do anything for money. I know I'm not supposed to mention political figures and anything like that, but there's a strong resemblance to somebody in our awareness right now with Miss Lick, and it got into the realm of a whole sexual fetish for her, I believe. But underneath it all was she could do. These people will do anything for money, and she had the money, and so she's different from Papa. Papa to me is just I don't know. He's just a kind of small time capitalist, and probably really was a liberal of sorts.
Opportunist almost.
Yeah, but he wasn't sadistic in the sense that Miss Lick is, and so she used money to. I think that's underneath that whole sexual fetish. I think was her use of dangling money in front of her, and then she could titillate herself and get off on watching these people be repaired. Except she was taking away from. I mean, it looked almost like it was altruistic.
Yeah.
She was rescuing the geeks from their geekdom, or the freaks from their freakdom, but not really. She was using them. I mean, I think there is a whole critique here somewhere of economic.
It definitely reminds me of like a sexual orientation reversal, like therapy kind of thing. You know, and the way that often is an expression, like the kind of fundamentalist obsession with other people's difference becomes actually an expression of your own repressed difference, if you will. You know, just like we'll sometimes hear it hasn't only happened once that, you know, the conservative pastor or the Republican, you know, senator turns out actually, you know, who's trying to pass laws suppressing homosexuality and so forth, actually himself is gay. So maybe there's something like that going on with Miss Lick, but then it gets fused. I think that's a really interesting observation with this satisfaction that comes through the ability to use your money to change other people.
Well, Freud called that reaction formation.
Also think about, like, I mean, Miranda always struggled with her tale. You know, she was ambivalent about it. She was more than ambivalent. She wasn't happy with it, and eventually kind of came to get used to it. And then she's tempted by Miss Lick. You would never find any of Oli or her siblings being willing to give up their deformity. If Miss Lick offered Oli $1 million to whatever, pick the surgery, you know, or Artie, it would be hilarious. It doesn't make any sense to them. So there's an interesting sense of authenticity, like an embrace of the geekness, of the freakness that happens in a wholehearted way by some people that Miranda doesn't have, that the other people that Miss Lick is able to manipulate don't have either. They're actually afraid of their deformity or dissatisfied with their deformity to the point where they can be manipulated by money. They can be coerced to give up something that they didn't want in the first place. They're thrilled. It's an interesting dichotomy, you know, how people relate to their freakishness and what it means to be different.
Miranda doesn't have a relationship to her family, though, right? I mean, that's part of it. I mean, one thing about Al is that he's a kind of a small-time capitalist, but he's taking care of his family, at least the ones that he keeps. They're all taken care of, and they're all part of the family. So it's not like he's just exploiting them sadistically. He's also, there is love there, right? And it's a twisted, weird kind of love. At one point, it's like this enslavement, she calls it. And like she has some dad issues, right, with that. Oli specifically. But Miranda's like doesn't have like that connection with like her tribe, her people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So the erotic fan fiction I was talking about, really Miss Lick would be a great fiction character.
Yeah. Definitely.
So if anybody wants to take up that writing prompt,
how about a chapter
in the discussion forum? Yeah, exactly. That's the name of it. You know, and just like somehow imagine some sort of short story where Miss Lick and Oli get like really drunk, you know, and they're like somehow they're locked in a closet together and they get really drunk and, you know, they both kind of that would be a fascinating thing for me to even to imagine and or read. So when I think about those two characters, I'm like, that's fascinating. I want those two to brawl. I want them to. I want Oli to like smear her freakishness all over Miss Lick and see what happens. You know.
That's great. Well, you've created the invitation. Hopefully someone will pick it up. Maybe yourself?
I'll pick it up.
Well, we could, you know, maybe there's a skit coming up at the end of this book club.
Yeah.
A dramatic reading of a play that's called, the spin-off play called Reaction Formation, starring Miss Lick and Oli.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't know. That was my big one that I wanted, because everybody seemed to have already touched on the things that I'd noticed and wanted to talk about too. I just really wanted to dive into Miss Lick and I don't know. We talked about so many of the things that I had in my notes. Is there anything else that anybody wants to throw into the pot?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. Actually, we've touched on a lot of topics.
Observations, like they're both readers. Oli and Miranda specifically, like I make my living by reading, she says at one point. Mm-hmm. There's this play, I think, between, in a certain way, I almost see Miranda as maybe some aspect of Katherine Dunn.
Yeah. Well, the whole family in the very beginning, that's like one of the things they do if they're not That's why this story starts getting told. They're supposed to all read. And then if it's like a particular night, like there's a thunderstorm outside or something, or Al's just in the right mood, they talk him into telling a story about their origins. So it's already right from the very beginning. It's like they're all readers. They're all literature oriented. So
I do think the connection, the relationship between Oli and Miranda's very fruitful conversation. There's probably a tremendous amount to unpack in terms of like how, in a sense, you know, in a psychic sense as well as a physical sense, Miranda is like sort of the unwrapped version of Oli. It's like, you know, what sort of a beautiful normal person underneath this beautiful deformed person actually it is sort of, you know, trying to come out.
Yeah, they're almost light and dark in a sense, the two of them in a single archetype. They seem to operate as an archetype.
It's also Miranda like recapitulates some aspects of her dad, and like when they do get together in Miranda's room and Miranda starts painting her, I guess Miranda's dad. The line is, she's feeling herself captivated, like she's exposed now. Miranda's painting her, and she says she's just like her father, casually, carelessly enslaving me with my love. And that I underlined that. I starred that. I was like, that's really interesting. Like, it's like being enslaved with your own love, or you know the person in your family, the other there. That's like what like it seems is breaking out. So like that I guess that's the geek love part. She calls it an ice knife sticks in my chest. I was like, wow, man, an ice knife sticking in your chest. I mean, just to combine like that, like synesthetically, like the cold and the sharpness, and you know the dagger in the heart kind of image. I mean, there's like just this pathos of that's underlying the relationships between these people, like Miranda and Oli and the whole family. I don't know what else to say. I feel like you know, there's so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to, and maybe we can save this for later. But Jeff, that's one of the things that I glommed onto too, which is this weird, like, you know, Oli following Miranda around with this maternal gaze, but also with a masculine objectifying kind of gaze as well. You know, and just the weird shit she says about her own daughter, like, oh, these guys are just looking at her, waiting to pump her full of jizz. I'm like, ew. Well, it's not something a mother should say about her daughter.
That was vivid language.
What?
Yeah.
You know, but it's that love enslavement that's all in there too. And there's plenty of mommy issues to unpack all the way around. But I think we're coming up on time, so like a good therapist, I'm going to look at the clock and be like, you know,
time to close.
Our time is up here. Till next time.
Anything really salient? Is there any other major things that anybody wants to just make a note of so it gets recorded?
Closing round check-ins.
And bring it back up.
Okay, closing round check-ins. Lightning round, go. Somebody jump in.
Jim.
I was interested in. I've been thinking, Marco, about you and your strategic use of homeschooling with your kids, and because you want your kids to be different. At the same time, I was thinking that you're protecting your kids from a lot of the weirdness from schooling. I have a daughter that homeschools now. You'll like this, Marco. She homeschools 5 kids,
wow.
Which is really quite a challenge. But I turned to Rachel and I said, you know, I just realized maybe Athena, who's my daughter, is actually, maybe her kids are really geeks because they do seem very different as a family because they've tried to remove themselves from mainstream society. And they are really different. These kids are different, but people are always saying, well, but they're not socialized. And so there's some interesting paradoxes in all of this.
Yeah. Socialize to what?
Well, exactly. And the same with Papa's kids. He's managed to keep them out of, the terror of being part of society, mainstream society. And then I started thinking about the hippies and then the freaks, because I think we called ourselves freaks after we called ourselves hippies. And I thought that wasn't an accidental word to refer as freaks. And it was like, how differently could we dress or speak or act in terms of non-normative ways of behaving? And so I do think there's some interesting political and social connections here for us to examine historically. This is really evocative. This book, it really gets me thinking about a lot of things, just because it's so out of patterns of almost anything most of us have ever read.
Well, we got another couple of hangouts coming up, right, Ollie?
Yeah. And the forum is going to be, a great place to cultivate these ideas. We're going to take, what we've recorded here, some of the stuff that we've touched on, and expand upon it there. So, make sure you come down if you have some time into the forum and get naked with us.
Well, thanks everybody. This was a real delight.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for coming, everyone. Anybody else have anything else they want to add?
You can now or forever hold your freak.
Okay, well, thanks for coming out tonight, guys. We're all probably going to want to check out the speeches and stuff. And I know it was a big event for people to avoid that and instead come here. So, cheers,
and
everyone.
Also, let's also say, Chris, just a note here on the chat.
Oh.
Yeah, he hasn't read the book, but totally welcome to, be part of the discussion, part of the space. And that's one thing in another book club I was in, it was really just about getting the people together to talk. And the book is an object. It's an occasion to bring up all kinds of other questions, issues, and things. And, we've woven it into politics. We've woven it a little bit into our personal lives. So, I think that's really the point. This is not a college class where if you haven't read the book, you're not going to get a good grade or anything like that. So, I think reading the book is good because then we have a common language discussion. But let's keep it open. Let's keep the conversation flowing. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Marco.
All right. Good night, everybody.
All right, everyone. Take care.